Okay. Zoom confirms we are live and therefore we are live. Buongiorno, buongiorno a tutti e buon pomeriggio. Beh, buongiorno a me, buon pomeriggio a voi e buon pomeriggio al professor Schlögel che ci raggiunge da Berna. Welcome, Professor Schlögel, and thanks for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
So this is going to be in English. We apologize. We are going on a channel that is on a stream other than the announced one where we had technical problems with StreamYard, could not transmit on that and had to create this ex novo. So as you well know, Professor Schlögel is a quite well-known authority on Russian and in particular Soviet issues. I enjoy reading his encyclopedic Soviet century of his trips to Moscow and the life in Russia and the form of kind of a mixture between history, anthropology, pop culture, ideology, and the inner working of the Soviet system. He has also a more smaller and maybe more to the point book about the nation of Ukraine and its coming about in various centuries, in various forms and various struggles. So the first question that I would like to ask Professor Schlögel is, do you think it's a Soviet effect, the attack on Ukraine, or it's a Russian effect, or neither? That is, what is this part of a very old, long-run attitude or culture or view of the world on the Russian part, or is it purely nostalgia for the Soviet Empire?
Historians tend to explain events which happened surprisingly that they are the logic result of historical processes, of long prepared processes. I do not believe that what has happened in 2014, the occupation of Crimea or the invasion now in February last year, that you could say in advance that will happen. This is the logic of the history, the logic of the system. I think it has to do with the inability of the Russian leadership, of the post-Soviet Russian leadership, to find a way out of the empire. And it's not only the Soviet Empire, it's a much longer history, the Russian Empire. And first of all, in my view, it is the inability, the lack of capacity of elites, but the Russian elite is not the only one which is unable or has limited capacities to come to terms with an entirely new situation. So I was surprised, but not only I myself was surprised, but my colleagues and friends to whom I called in 2 days before the invasion, when I heard the speech of Mr. Putin on 22nd, it was a kind of declaration of war, but even up to the morning of 24th, I did not believe, I did not dare to believe that really he is going into. And even people I called in Lviv and in Kiev, they said, yes, we know about the preparation, about the army which is on the border, 100,000, 150,000 soldiers. We know all that, but up to the last moment, they didn't believe that he is going to dare to make this step and creating an entirely new situation after 45. And I mean, I belong to a generation which does not have any experience dealing with war, violence, violence that has always been an event on TV, on the news, in the evening news from far away, but that it will happen now in Europe, in the center of Europe. And I have been in these places which are bombed now. I have been there years and years. And so it's an entirely new situation. And I mean, for many people, and especially in my profession, it was a surprise because most of people doing Russian studies or Soviet studies never dealt with Ukrainian history. There are few exceptions. We have few experts. For instance, Mark van Hagen in the United States, Seri Plochy in Harvard, and others. Very, very few exceptions in our profession of Russian and Soviet history who did intensive studies or who were interested in Ukraine. And it's a very strange and even a scandal in the science community that it was necessary a war, a real war, to bring back the Ukraine history, Ukraine culture, the Ukraine nation onto the agenda of our profession.
But so, if I understand, you can decide if it is a leftover of the Soviet fascination or if it is nothing but a view of the role of Russia and of the way in which that area of the world should be organized and governed and so on. Let me try to be blunt, given that I'm not an historian, but an economist by training, and I'm just a dilettante reading your books and trying to understand why, in fact, Putin and his government did what they did. And I agree with you, even if the probability assigned to the event increased progressively in those days, especially because the secret services and the American administration were so insistently exposing themselves to say that. At a certain point, my argument in my mind became, well, they're not completely stupid. They've made a lot of mistakes in their life, but they're not completely stupid. And right now, they have so much at stake in terms of reputation after the Afghanistan debacle. They're insisting so much that the Russian will invade must be based on very strong evidence, which they evidently had. And so at a certain point, I switched to the group of the believer, not because I thought it was rational for Russia to do that, but because I thought it was too irrational for the American administration to be lying. But going back to the point, is this putting, given your knowledge of the inner working of this regime, of this system of power in Russia, that has been there for about 30 years, has evolved during the 90s, but then stabilized at the beginning of this century. Would you go along with the tradition, with the view that seems to be dominating in many minds? Oh, it's just Putin that is a complete new Hitler in different clothes, with a different face, but essentially his mind works in the same way. Or is it, in my view, more realistically, but I may be wrong, a overall culture and social groups that actually demand that, the way in which the system works implies also attacking Georgia and controlling Belarus and eventually trying to break the bone, at least, of the Ukrainian independence movement.
The history of the road to the war will be written not today, not tomorrow. It will take time. And I think that one of the challenges, the intellectual challenges in the situation now is that we are confronted with a new phenomenon, and we do not have enough categories, notions, ideas to analyze and to make clear what is going on, to understand what is the dynamism behind this attack. And I mean, you can say you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points which are responsible for this decision, but in fact, we do not know how the inner circle who made the decision, how they made the decision. I mean, it's a general.
No, let me interrupt you, because that's an important phrase. Even people in your circle with your level of specialization, attention, have no idea how the decision process works. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, of course. Who does know? The inner circle, the process of decision making. We have an idea that there are secret services. We have an idea that there are military men, but we know that there are personalities like an erratic and very strange figure like Putin, we do not know what is going on inside, and we have just to be prepared for everything. That's all what I can say. Every day, tomorrow or over tomorrow, can something happen we do not know. We are not prophets. We have no intimate knowledge of these processes. And something is wishful thinking, that there will be a kind of rationality inside the military milieu, or that there will be oligarchs who are going to see that there are risks for their existence or for their fortunes. I am very skeptical, and I cannot give an answer probably you are expecting. The reasons, number one.
Oh, no, I'm just curious, so it's fine.
I do not have this. The general impression I have is that the leadership is unable to find a way out of the empire to lead or to give an idea of what post-Soviet modern Russia could be. And behind this crisis is the question, who are we? Who are the Russians? Who are we beyond the limits of the empire? The empire has come to an end, and obviously the leadership is unable to accept that the time of empires is running out, and to prepare for the escape or for the controlled demontage of the empire. And we know from the situation after First World War, the Paris treaties, we know the problem, how long it took time for the British Empire, for the Dutch Empire, for the French Empire, and maybe also for the German Empire to come to terms with the end of the existence of the empire. And there was a kind of naivety in the late 80s and 90s inside Russia, and I would say also in the West, not being prepared for the very complicated and maybe violent process of the demolition or deconstruction or disintegration of the empire. And the problem of the Russian leadership is that they have no idea how to create a post-imperial modern Russian nation. They do not, Putin is talking, and his ideologists are talking about Ruski Mir, the Russian world. What is Ruski Mir? Russia is not Ruski Mir. Russia,
well, they seem to, if I may intervene, they seem to believe, or at least that's what I say to a naive eye like mine, that it is where people speak Russian and there is a large number of them. And they seem to identify, they seem to have been left over with one piece of identity. Probably the destruction of the overall Soviet system was such a, put the national identity such in rumble that little was left. And the left was the Orthodox Church and the language and the memory or a monument and history of the great tradition of way back. I'm just throwing it in to your thought.
Yeah, I'm not sure if whether you can say there is the memory. You have generations. You have the Soviet socialized generation, which was not prepared, or maybe feeling now nostalgic about the time and the life and the biographies they left behind. But there was a new generation. There were new people who expected something to start after the agony of the empire. And millions of these people left the country, millions, even after the October Revolution, when about 2 million people left the former Russian Empire. In comparison to what is going on in the last 20 or 30 years, it's unbelievable. And the Russian leadership does not offer, cannot offer a perspective how to modernize the country, which is so rich in talents, in human capital, in energetic people, in patriots, which want to create a Russia, a modern Russia, which is recognized all over the world. But he has no idea, and they are entirely dependent on, and you are the economist, they are entirely dependent on the global market. The only they produce and the only thing which is making money, a lot of money, is the global market for gas, for sources, for fossil sources, for gas, oil, and minerals. That's all. Russia, in the last 30 years, did not create any innovation in terms of technology. All these people who were able to do this and to create the modern Russia, they left. They left, or they resigned. They didn't know what to do, and they have not found a place. So I'm talking about these people. You talked about the nostalgic. Yes, they are. And I have to say, I have been in the 90s, in these cruel times of destruction, of careers, of new borderlands, of 25 million Russian-speaking people outside the Russian Federation, in Kazakhstan, in the Baltics. I well understand the feeling of traumatization, of tragedy, etc. But the question is, what is the solution out of these time of troubles, these times of transformation, of the disintegration of the former empire? And I mean, most people say this is the situation of Germany after Versailles and the crisis and the collapse of the Weimar. It was predictable. And but we had not a Weimar situation in Russia. We had not a Weimar situation. we had a situation when money, capital was flowing outside of Russia, and money from the global markets were going into Russia. But this leadership was unable and was not interested to invest these capital into creating a new Russia. So I would say to make a nice little successful war, this was the idea of Putin in 2014 or even before, to keep together a society which in fact does not have a perspective. And it's easier to provoke a little war against Georgia or Ukraine, to keep together a failing state. And this is the danger, that Russia under Putin has become a failing state. And he is trying to keep these complex together with creating a state of emergency, mobilization of chauvinism, of a memory culture.
Yes.
Which
well,
is
the last one seemed to be a recurring characteristic. I mean, we have plenty of historical, sociological evidence that says, regimes that cannot provide for what their population asks for, that cannot provide a sense of belonging and a positive way forward, and that face the risk of insurrection or even disintegration. I will come to this disintegration issue in a moment, asking you what you think, then often recur to the creation of external enemy, and you unite the country on the very basic thing, which is some form of tribal nationalism. There is the enemy threatening us. In this case, it is an old enemy, the eternal enemy, the Western, or in its new form, it's no longer France of Napoleon, it's or Germany of Hitler, it's the United States through NATO, and therefore you create wars as a system of staying in power. But we know that this doesn't really work much. And again, we know that wherever this happened, by the way, I agree with you that comparing the situation to Weimar in the 20s in your country, or vice versa, as you know, the Italians were formally on the winning side of the First World War, but they took it as a semi-defeat. They call it the victory that had been cheated upon, that had been so that they felt defeated, if not on the battlefield diplomatically, certainly they were socially and economically. So yeah, the situation is different from that. I agree, because most of the damage is caused internally, and they really have not been treated after the early 90s like Germans and Italians were. But going back to what I was going to say, there are tension again. Okay, you told me we don't know how the decision process is going. We don't know the distribution of power. Which are the power groups in the army, across the various republics, in Moscow, in the economic elite. But again, let me push you a bit and try to ask you to speculate, if at least on the base of your information. Many people talk about disintegration. That is to the fact that in spite of the common language and the fact that many of the republics are being kept together since the days of early 19th century, still they're very different ethnically, sociologically, and even in terms of interest. Especially as we go far east. Do you think there is any risk of that, or this is just a fantasy of geopolitical observers that want to create too much of a Star Wars out of the invasion of Ukraine?
We do not know what will happen. I mean, this is the biggest country of the world, the territory, and it's unthinkable that you can control this vast territory from one point in Moscow if you don't have an idea how to integrate it in terms of modernization, of creating new infrastructure, to give people from Smolensk to Vladivostok to the Pacific a perspective. And this, there is no program, no idea how to do it. And the political discourse among thinking and reflective people inside Russia and in the diaspora, in the immigration is, of course, what will happen? What will it be possible after the defeat of Russia or the fall of Putin? How can this Russian Federation can keep together? Will be, as some say, federation, a real federation of different subjects, of 80 different regions. Is it possible to create a kind of United States of Eurasia, or is there a clash between the more Islamic states, between the rich oil and gas regions and the poor nations? Will there be a clash between planet Moscow with 12, 15 million people and the center of all wealth and capital, clash between the vast spaces of the Russian province? So again, we do not know. But I have to say one word. Maybe I'm telling too much that we do not know. We know something very well. Yeah, and I would like to affirm that we can judge about things. And this is, for instance, the public rhetoric. This is the declarations, that is the speech of the mass media, of the president's administration, and leading figures of the Russian Federation today. And listening to what is Dmitry Medvedev, a former president, is saying, and the member and the head of the Security Council, listening to what people like Prigozhin are saying, this is quite clear. We can say, yes, this is the rhetoric of folkish fascist regime. I do not say that Putin is Hitler, but this is quite clear. This is the rhetoric of a fascist imperial leadership. That's quite clear, and we have to be prepared. And if the leading figure of the Security Council in the Kremlin administration is saying that Ukraine doesn't exist, who needs Ukraine? Why is this man at the head of the Ukrainian state a Nazi, etc.? This is quite clear. This is hate speech, but it's not hate speech somewhere in the internet, but this is hate speech at the top of one of the biggest powers, a nuclear power. And so we have just to be prepared and to be serious about these threats. And I mean, it was impossible in late Soviet times that somebody in the leadership is talking these kind of words, this vocabulary. And I mean, you have just to go every night to the talk shows of Vladimir Solovyov, the man who has, I think, 6 villas in Lago Como and in Sardinia. This is fascist speaking. This is a fascist vocabulary, and it's not just a play and game with words. It's really every night the voice of the leadership in the media space from Smolensk to the Pacific. And at least many people of the older generation dependent on state channels, state TV, they are looking to these news and talk shows, and they believe that, for instance, the massacre in Bucha was organized by a special crew of TV and camera people, film people from Ukraine. They believe it. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people calling from Ukraine to their parents, grandparents, etc., on the Russian side. And these people, they, on the Russian side, they believe really that there are Nazis on the top of, and that Mariupol is organized by nationalists and etc. It's absurd in a time of global information, etc. But there exist spaces, media spaces, where you can talk these things, and there are millions of people who are getting these informations every night.
Honestly, I was going to interrupt you. Say, I'm not surprised with this. Unfortunately, in my country, if I understand less in yours, in my country of origin, not here in the United States, in my other country, the one where I was born and raised, even if there is apparently not a regime, a large chunk of the population, maybe the majority, if not the majority, a good portion, believe the same thing. We have Italian top journalists that have denied the Bucha happened and the various other massacres happened, and have taken the position this was a show from some Hollywood or Secret Service crew, and have never even apologized, and have denied the theater bombing, that have denied the deportation of kids. That would open a whole nother debate, and I would be interested to know your opinion on why even in the Western world, I don't know how to say, the Cold War or the fight or the war between the two great imperialism, USA and USSR, have left Westerners with such a dystopic view of reality to believe that in order to find a way to humiliate, say, the USA, you have to put up with such massacres. But maybe that's for another conversation. You seem to have spent quite some good time in reading your thing and thinking about what creates this archaeological strata in our conscience and in our identity. So that would be worth a conversation. But going back to what these people believe, it seems unavoidable from your analysis. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I would like to have a different view and therefore contradict and make the debate a bit more lively. But unfortunately, I agree that there is only one choice we have, which is to defeat seriously this regime, because to the extent that the people, the large chunk of people of Russia are convinced, live in this pseudo-invented world of a Nazi regime in Ukraine expanding and allied to the rest of the Western world. Which other way do we have to actually shock them out of this fantasy, or better nightmare, and come to terms with the reality of what the world is, if not by defeating them militarily? And which consequences does this have?
Yeah, I mean, the news, the information from the front line will come finally to Russia too, and they do arrive. And not only news, but the black baskets with the bodies will come back. And I mean, there are things happening we did not expect. Please remember, I would like to remind you that after the declaration of the mobilization in last autumn, about 600,000 men, people who were afraid to go to war, they crossed the border. No one of the experts, of the Russian and post-Soviet experts did expect, or the experts for civil society in Russia did expect that about now, I mean, it's even 1 million of people just left the country to escape the mobilization and to go to war. I do not say this is opposition, this is a political decision, but it's just escaping this situation and making a decision to go. So, and we do not know what will happen under the stress of the growing stress of the coming fights. And I think the decision will be made on the battlefield. And I think diplomacy and media, etc., they will have some impact, but the decision will be taken on the ground. And we will see what kind of army this is, demoralized or corrupt. Or, we will see, but we have to be prepared. And as we see now, Russia is going to continue to bomb every night, to exhaust not only the soldiers at the front line, but the civil population. And this is also, how to say, shame for Europe not to have made a decision to save the cities of Ukraine. And I mean, I'm always asking, what would happen if Russia would bomb Venice or Marseille or Genova, places, historical monuments, the infrastructure, the railway corridors, etc. And the West and Europe made a decision last year that they would not go into to protect the Ukrainian civil population, to save and to protect the cities, to close the sky. I mean, there has been a change now in the last year, but it's very late and maybe in some ways too late. And we will see. We don't even know how the European states, the leaderships, the population will cope with the stress which is related to the war efforts and the efforts of defending the Ukraine. But what you said, that talking about the experience of other countries, not only of Russia, of course we have. I mean, the West is part of this Putinistic world. I mean, years, decades, the city of London benefited from these billions of money flowing out of Russia. The real estate at the Côte d'Azur and in Miami, they benefit from the oligarchs. So there's also a kind of corruption in the West as a part of the situation which has been created before the invasion last year.
So you seem, yeah, well, there is a tone of preoccupation. I agree also on that, in particular, the closing of the sky. And we go toward the end because I know you have an appointment coming. The non-closing of the skies on the part of NATO and the Western nations has been a tragic mistake. And if you allow me, a sign of cowardice on the part both of the population and their political leaders. I suppose for a while, there was a reason to believe that the nuclear threat had some sense, even if it did not have a logical threat. Strange that people that have been interacting for 70 years with the logic of mutual destruction, of assured mutual destruction, which is the only thing that has kept us from the nuclear war, felt immediately for the view that one of the sides would be using nuclear wars, committing generalized suicide, something that didn't make any sense. If for 70 years you haven't done it, it's unclear why all of a sudden you decide to commit universal harakiri. But that has been the logic, and apparently only the fact on the terrain have convinced the Western leaders that maybe we could provide air support and strong support to the Ukrainian, and that the Russian talking about nuclear holocaust was just the blubbering of a crazy regime. But the view you seem to inspire is a view that leaves little space and to how can I say, anything but a very persistent war. And if this is the case, persisting war, if this is the case, shouldn't we just asking our government to take a stronger stance and in some form say that at this point, the continuing aggression on Ukraine is de facto an aggression to our countries, and invite basically, or threaten if you want. I'm putting the thing in a very extreme form I'm aware of, but I want to, in some sense, provoke you, saying to the Russian regime, either you stop it or we will have to intervene militarily in a direct form. Because otherwise what we have in front are maybe years of attrition.
Yeah.
Isn't that the dilemma we're facing?
Yes, of course, it is a dilemma, but we know at the same time that the threat with the nuclear bomb is working, and it was working from the very beginning, and it was the reason of the hesitation of the European governments to really to protect and to close the sky. And this, I mean, this ability to escalate and to keep the dominance of escalation, this is a real, how to say, the capacity, or you may say, the evil genius of the Putin regime. He knows about the fear on the West. He knows that he can use the threat with nuclear bombs to achieve his goals. He knows about the effect of the nuclear discourse, and he is waiting for the results of this pressure he's making. So beyond the discussion of nuclear war, we know exactly that he's working with the threat and with the pressure. And we have to learn to resist these politics of escalation and we have to, to keep, to be strong in keeping support for the Ukrainians. If we are not able and not prepared, not ready to engage ourselves. But if Ukraine will defeat it, if Ukraine will taken from the map of Europe, this is not only a Ukrainian affair. This has to do with the existence and the future of all Europe. So yes, I also feel fear. Who does not feel fear that there is the threat of war of attrition? But even you can even not throwing the nuclear bomb, you can just making the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant exploding. You don't need a nuclear bomb. You can do some other things. You can blow up the dams on the Dnipro River, which has been done during World War II. You can destroy the infrastructure. And for instance, Zaporozhye, nobody knows what is going on now. Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is cut from electricity. And we should talk about this. This is a real nuclear threat. It's not only only a talk about the future of nuclear bombs, but there are many things in conventional terms which are as destructive as nuclear bombs too.
It looks like I got out of you another side of the tragic situation which we are at, which leaves nevertheless no escape. Yes, there are various forms in which a criminal regime can provoke major and never seen before damages to the world and certainly to the Europeans, and that seems something that Europeans are not aware, or there is a part. And in closing, I will ask you briefly about that, and then a very practical question. That's something that Europeans don't seem to perceive. So let me ask you, how would you interpret this attitude that is widespread in your country, in Italy, in France, of let them do it, feed the beast, feed the Ukrainians' bodies and land and monument to the beast will be satisfied and leave us alone, which contradicts any logic, contradicts history, contradicts even self-interest. It's a form of blindness, but nevertheless, we see it widespread. How would you think of it? And second, a more practical, many people that are listening are asking, are your books, more of your books being translated in Italian, in particular the one on the Ukraine and the build of a nation, or will they have to learn English at least, if not German or French?
No, some books are translated. I mean, the book on Ukraine, I think it is, or it will be. The last book is about the Secolo Sovietico. It appeared in Italy. And a small book about perfumes, the scent of empires.
That's taken from the starting of the Soviet Empire, the Soviet century, right? If I recall. I haven't seen the Italian one, I've read it in English, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, I'm not an expert on fragrance, perfumes and scents, but it's a fantastic story that you can.
Yeah, I like that story. I invite everybody to read it. It's a beautiful story about the fame of Chanel and other perfume in Soviet Russia and why it was a status symbol.
Yeah, but the first question you had, I mean, we will see in the next time how the Europeans, will they stand with Ukraine, or will they surrender, or will they resist, or will they, yeah, we will see. And it's a quite open situation in my view. And as it is open in history before, I mean, we have, I'm always going back now to the 30s, when also in Europe, in France, in Great Britain, in the United States, there was a discussion, should we resist or should we surrender? Should we go to Munich and to give the beast what he wants to get the peace for our time, as Chamberlain said. Yes, Europe has the choice, and we will see. And there are people who will stand with Ukraine, and there are people who will make concessions and to get peace for our time, as Chamberlain said.
Okay, well,
yeah.
So at the end, it's a matter of choice. The Europeans will have to choose if they have to stand or if they have to surrender.
Yes.
Well, thanks for your time. I know you have to go. We can maybe have the opportunity in the future to continue, maybe on going deeper on some of the things you talk about in your book, and maybe you can tell some of our listeners the stories of Mosca Rossa, Red Moscow, and which is a good piece of social anthropology or social psychology, if you want. All right. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Have a good evening.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye. Grazie a tutti e niente, alla prossima. Buonanotte di nuovo, professor Schlögel.